Hey friends, in the previous videos, we shared how open source AI models and vaccination are examples of positive externalities. And in this video, we cover ways to address positive externalities of production and consumption using these examples. So this particular screen that you're seeing shows a mind map of the 5 key policies you can use to correct positive externalities. And I just want to be clear that positive externalities can refer to both production and consumption. So the 5 broad categories would be government regulation and legislation, direct government provision, education, market-based policies, which are basically subsidies, as well as nudges. So if we think about these in the context of the earlier 2 examples that we discussed, how do we apply these examples? Firstly, in the context of government regulation, when we travel during COVID, all travelers must be fully vaccinated and wear a mask. And this is a regulation that is mandated across all airports, across all airlines. If you think about the direct government provision, well, if you live in the US, the CDC's Bridge Access program provides free COVID vaccines to adults without health insurance. So that is an example of direct government provision in the US in the context of COVID-19. In terms of education, we have platforms such as Coursera and Udemy that are sharing tutorials for open source AI. And these are usually free for anybody to sign up and enroll. In terms of market-based policies, which basically refer to just subsidies, in Singapore, the government funds up to 70% of course fees for citizens learning new skills in the national upskilling program called Skills Future. So this particular diagram shows how to reflect the 2 policies of direct government provision and subsidies in the diagram that we learned earlier. If you think about what a subsidy does or what a government provision does, it actually helps to lower the cost of production for the producer who's developing the private good. For example, in the context of open source AI models, if Meta receives some subsidies to develop its Llama 3 model, this will reduce the overall cost of production by Meta, and this can, in theory, incentivize them to produce more. So this actually increases the overall supply of the open source AI models and shifts the MPC curve down towards the MSC curve, which is over here. So this is how the direct government provision or subsidy policies influence what we understand about positive production externalities, and this is how we reflect it in the graph. In terms of the other policies that we learn, such as government regulation, education, and nudges, if you think about them, these policies incentivize the consumer to consume more of it. So for example, if we are mandated to take vaccinations, or if we are mandated to access some courses that are required for upskilling, this can actually increase our overall demand for that particular item, be it vaccines or courses. So as a result, when more individuals go for these goods or services, the overall MPB curve will shift towards the right because more individuals receive more private benefits, and this in turn increases the MPB to overlap with the MSB. And this is why the demand curve shifts to the right. But evaluating these policies, usually these subsidies and direct government provision are used to address positive consumption externalities. But once again, when we think about subsidies and direct government provision, we remember that these usually require deep government intervention, and we require the government to use some fraction of their budgets to provide these subsidies. So as a result, this naturally results in an opportunity cost. So this incurs quite difficult decisions over which goods and services to subsidize, as well as the size of the subsidy. So for example, in the US, its overall COVID-19 vaccination program cost $3 billion. So this is $3 billion of opportunity cost, which could have been spent on other parts of the US economy, such as healthcare and infrastructure. There are also highly political decisions to be made that could take a long time to be implemented. For example, I'm sure you may remember the pushback from certain political parties in the US when the size of a stimulus package or subsidy was raised during COVID. Lastly, the size of benefits are usually very difficult to define clearly when it comes to planning how much of a subsidy to design and implement. When we talk about legislation and education, these could, in theory, be easier to implement in some cases. For example, it is easier to legislate that all children complete primary and secondary school, basically elementary school and high school, until the age of 12 years old. But this practice of building legislation can be quite difficult in other situations, such as educating everyone on the effects of COVID-19 vaccinations on society and encouraging them to get vaccinated.